Sheridan Community Land Trust Discovery Session, Big Goose Creek Virtual Tour. Please note that this is being recorded, so please keep your camera and mics off while we're recording. If you have any comments or want to share any stories from the area, please put them in the comment section and we will read through them at the end. Some upcoming events for SCLT include Unplugged with Discovery Session, All Scents Scavenger Hunt on Red Grade Trail on Monday, May 20th. We also have the beginning of our mountain bike discovery nights starting May 27th at Blacktooth Park. Then we have Trail Fest 2021 starting June 4th, going to June 5th at Kendrick Park. Please visit SheridanCLT.org to find out more information and to see our upcoming events. If you would like to share this video with friends or family, it'll be available on YouTube tomorrow and on our website. And now over to Carrie Edinger, our SCLT's historical educator.
Thank you, Alexis.
You're welcome.
As Alexis says, my name is Carrie Edinger and I'm the Land Trust historical educator. Thank you for tuning in tonight here in Sheridan. It's a beautiful evening, so I appreciate you tuning in via Zoom during our nice weather. If you're new to the Sheridan Community Land Trust, we help preserve open spaces with land conservation. We offer recreation opportunities with local trails, and we also preserve local and regional history, like what you're going to experience this evening. Another way that we preserve history is through historic preservation easements. We hold an easement on the Sheridan Inn and also on the Houston Homestead, which is right outside of Claremont. And what an easement does is it preserves the historical integrity of a building or an architectural part of a structure. We also have tours or educational programming that is all about local and regional history. And the Big Goose Creek virtual tour is also a walking tour. And if you would like to know more about our tours or even the history program, I put my contact information in the chat box. So feel free to reach out to me. And I have some big thank yous this evening to the Little Goose Multimedia, which helped with their skills and their time to help put this virtual tour together. And I can't express how much I appreciate that. And Bill Yellowtail is our narrator this evening for the virtual tour. And also the Wyoming Humanities Council, who helps support our history program. And as Alexis mentioned, this evening after we present the virtual tour, please put any memories of the tour sites in the chat box. We love to hear about what the community's memories are to our history, family ancestry. Questions and comments are also welcome. So let's explore some history.
Welcome to the Big Goose Creek virtual tour. Journey with us along the path of Little and Big Goose Creeks, curvy waterways that flow through this area called Goose Creek Valley. As we all know, water is a critical resource for humans and wildlife's daily existence. This historic journey will focus on Big Goose Creek as a natural resource for the inhabitants of Goose Creek Valley that has become the city of Sheridan. This stone marker commemorates the first cabin in the valley, built by J. Peter Dutch Henry Van Dover. Dutch Henry was a fur trapper in the Wind River Valley and probably traded for beaver pelts with regional Plains Indian tribes such as the Shoshone and Crow. During the early 1800s in the Rocky Mountain and Bighorn Mountain region, beaver pelts were in high demand with distant furriers and fashion houses for items like the beaver felt hat that was much in fashion across Europe from 1550 to 1850. What ended the boom of the fur trade and saved the American beaver from extinction was that beaver fur fell out of fashion in Europe after the mid 1800s. The Dutch Henry cabin was built in 1873 near the junction of Big and Little Goose Creeks, which was approximately in the area north of the intersection of modern day Smith and Brooks Streets. The cabin was built near the end of the fur trade and used the creeks as a natural resource for daily living needs. The cabin was probably constructed of cottonwood logs and had a dirt floor with a roof covered with sod. It is likely that Dutch Henry and a Shoshone woman companion could have been some of the first year-round residents of Goose Creek Valley. Dutch Henry abandoned the cabin in 1879. The stone historical marker was placed in 1914 by the Daughters of the American Revolution, Sheridan, Wyoming chapter. This land is now the city of Sheridan, but the area has had many inhabitants. I want you to imagine this concrete landscape as an open natural space with no houses or fences. The Crow tribe of Indians would have inhabited this area long before and during the fur trade time period. There are slightly different ways to pronounce the name of the tribe in the Crow language, depending on which of the three bands of the Crow tribe is speaking. The Mountain Crow and Kicked in the Belly people would say Absarake, while the River Crow would say Absalake. The Crows called Goose Creek Ashkuale, meaning Middle River. Ashkuale flows from Cloud Peak, known to the Crow as Awakawa Kuawashe, translated as Extended Mountain or Mountain Above the Mountains. It is the spiritual center of Crow Country and is regarded as a sacred place. In 1851 and 1868, the Crow signed treaties with the United States wherein the tribe reserved some 38 million acres of the original Crow Country in Montana and Wyoming. Presently, the Crow Indian Reservation comprises 2.2 million acres in Montana, just north of Sheridan County. In the 1830s, River Crow Chief Alapush, or Sorebelly, described Crow Country, which is the Bighorn Mountains and surrounding region, to Robert Campbell of the Rocky Mountain Fur Company. He described the landscape of the surrounding areas around Crow Country and described the creatures and bountiful landscapes. He ended his description with the declaration that the Crow Country is exactly in the right place. Everything that is good is to be found there. There is no country like Crow Country. Goose Creek Valley flows east and then north from the Bighorn Mountains. Current day Smith and Brooks Streets is in the proximity where the bend of Big Goose Creek would have met Little Goose Creek. It is said that early settlers traveling through this area named the creeks for the numerous wild geese found in this migratory habitat. Little Goose Creek was rerouted into a straight channel in the early 1890s to accommodate the building of the Burlington and Missouri Railroad. And Big Goose Creek was rerouted in the 1960s to stop flooding in the city of Sheridan. Note the huge time difference in managing the two creeks' routes. It was easier for the railroad to pay for the rerouting of the waterways than to build several bridges over them. The worst flood experienced by Big Goose Creek was on September 27th, 1923. Heavy rainfall expanded the creek's banks so much that Kendrick Park and the whole town of Sheridan were flooded. In 1939, WPA, or the Works Project Administration, project and a 1963 U.S. Army Corps of Engineers flood control project tamed the creek. In all this time of managing Big Goose Creek, the waterway has been a main water supply source for the city of Sheridan. Heading west from Brook Street in the Mill Park area, we traverse the site of what was once a booming flour mill and grain elevator. The Sheridan Manufacturing Company flour mill dominated this Sheridan neighborhood. Big and Little Goose Creeks flowed together just east of the mill. A mill race cut across a curve of Big Goose Creek and powered the mill. A mill race is a channel that delivers water from a nearby stream and drives a mill wheel, the mechanical process of grinding the wheat into flour. The mill race probably occupied a portion of the Big Goose Creek route that we stand in front of today. Constructed prior to 1896, soon after Sheridan was incorporated in 1884, the mill was located directly across Marion Street to the east of current 476 Marion Street. It produced 25 barrels a day of white swan and sifted snow flour. In 1915, the wooden flour mill burned to the ground and was quickly replaced by a new facility constructed of brick. The new mill was powered by electricity from an electric dynamo. From a 1916 newspaper announcement, we see that the mill was back in operation, and the Sheridan Manufacturing Company flour mill was requesting community support for buying local Sheridan-made goods, meaning the flour products that they produced. By 1927, the mill was called the Pioneer Watermill Flour and Elevator, and with new expansions, the mill produced 60 to 75 barrels of flour a day. The mills were a major component of the economy of north central Wyoming that provided collection, storage, and milling of locally produced wheat, some of which came from southeastern Sheridan County. By 1947, the mill was no longer in operation, and it was demolished in 1962 to make way for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project of rerouting Big Goose Creek. Looking at the Lewis Street Bridge, we see the construction project that was completed in 2015 and realigned the intersections of Marion, Dow, and Lewis Streets. In addition to the bridge replacement, the Big Goose Pathway, part of Sheridan Pathways, was extended beneath the bridge to parallel the creek's edge. The current bridge structure was built from the previously existing Lewis Street Bridge that had been constructed in 1939 and was a simple steel flange girder bridge. In May 1939, this was a WPA project. The reconstruction also altered the right-angle junction of the road at Dow and Marion Streets by intersecting with Lewis Street. As you can see in the Sanborn Fire Insurance map, the bridge cut through the old path of Marion Street. The triangular land parcel where the native river rock fountain is located did not exist as a park until WPA crews reconstructed the Lewis Street Bridge. This section of land was part of the original flour mill site. On the west corner of Mill Park, you'll find a large stone fountain, commonly called Crooks Fountain. It is commonly thought to have been named for General George Crook, who led U.S. Army troops during the Great Sioux War. But Few people know that the fountain was actually and officially dedicated to a civic-minded flour mill proprietress, Mrs. Margaret Weltner. Under the direction of Water Commissioner Art Swickard, the city of Sheridan built the fountain in 1938. It was dedicated to Mrs. Weltner for her work helping the city to prevent floods from Big Goose Creek. The confusion arises from the fact that in 1964, an interpretive sign stood near the fountain describing the historic expedition led by General George Crook, who in 1876 established a temporary Army supply base near this Big Goose Valley location. Over the years, Sheridan residents began associating the fountain with the General Crook event, leading most residents to refer to it as the Crooks Fountain. In 2016, the National Society of the Colonial Dames assisted the city of Sheridan in repairing the fountain and developing interpretive materials. From a booming flour mill site to a brewing empire, the Sheridan Brewery Company began in 1887. The brewery owned about 5 acres of land here. Between 1910 and 1922, the brewing company built houses to provide living quarters for the brewery's managers. A couple of the houses from this area were 429 and 336 West Alger. 429 West Alger was adjacent to the library and was demolished in the spring of 2018, while 336 still stands as the private residence on the left side of the street near the Whitney Commons entrance. Today, Whitney Commons Park and the Hub on Smith parking lot is approximately where the Sheridan Brewery was located. The brewery was founded by Peter Demple, George Paul, and Arnold Scherge. Their aim was to start a brewery with fresh water off the mountains, which Big Goose Creek provided for their brewing process. The three men had startup funds which amount to $10,000 in gold bars and was transported from Topeka, Kansas to Fort Custer, Montana, located near present-day Hardin, via the Northern Pacific Railway. It is not known why they chose the Sheridan area to start their brewery, but they were leaving Topeka because it was in a dry county. They took this route because the Deadwood stage route was known for being constantly robbed during the late 1800s. The funds were moved by horse-drawn wagon to Sheridan. That was a little over 100-mile journey, which took them along the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains and through the Crow Reservation, which still held intertribal tensions from the Sioux Indian Wars. Peter Demple, who immigrated from Germany, was known as a bootlegger and gold miner who fiercely opposed any encroachment on American liberty. Besides the brewery enterprise, the three men invested in other businesses around town and helped build up the infrastructure of the city of Sheridan. The Sheridan Brewery was one of the largest employers in Wyoming Territory during the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. Before the Prohibition period from 1920 to 1933, the brewery shipped more than 60,000 barrels of beer annually in a 5-state area. They marketed their business on loyalty to the community and purity of ingredients, such as local sourced grain and mountain water. Prohibition didn't slow down the brewery. Instead, they shifted to new products like a near beer called Sherex and an assortment of fruit-flavored soft drinks. Peter Demple passed away in 1932 and did not live to see the reversal of U.S. prohibition and the laws he struggled with throughout his life. After the prohibition repeal, the brewery was back to producing 600 barrels of beer a day. In 1954, Sheridan Brewery stopped its beer operations and focused on soda pop. That same year, the brewery became the innovator to put beverages in flat top cans known as can-a-pop. Unfortunately, this business diversion did not have positive results for the company, and it closed soon thereafter. The brewery building stood empty for many years. It was torn down in the early 1990s, and the Whitney Commons Park was created in the early 2000s. Edward A. Whitney, represented in this sculpture, arrived in Sheridan in 1885. That was just 3 years after the founding of the town of Sheridan by John Laux. Whitney purchased John Laux's store and post office building on the corner of Main and Laux Streets and started the first bank in town, called the Bank of Sheridan. Whitney lived in the upstairs apartment of the bank for the rest of his life. He was the co-founder of Sheridan Land Company, which built much of the town of Sheridan. In 1888, he was the town's second mayor. Edward A. Whitney willed most of his estate to establish Whitney Benefits Incorporated and thus created the first educational foundation in Wyoming. According to his original trustees, Whitney spent 3 decades of his life planning his gift to the people of Sheridan County. The foundation was established in 1927, 10 years after his death in 1917. In the years since the establishment of the foundation, the earnings from the trust have educated thousands of youth, heavily funded Sheridan College and the YMCA, built Whitney Commons Park and the Sheridan Ice Rink, established the Whitney Center, and benefited the area and its people in a myriad of additional ways. This historic structure is known as the Mandel Cabin. It was probably built between 1878 and 1880 and would have been the second or third dwelling built in what is now Sheridan. This cabin was originally built of hand-hewn pine logs for walls, with a sod roof and wood planks for the floor, just as we see it today. We don't have a lot of background on George Mandel, except that he was a trapper and maybe wanted to settle in this area since the fur trade boom had come to a close. Mandel did establish a post office in 1881, and the area was briefly known as Mandel in Wyoming Territory. He originally chose the spot for the cabin at the original confluence of Big and Little Goose Creeks, the area where we just walked on Brook Street. The site Mandel chose probably had to do with being close to a water resource for daily living needs. The cabin has been owned by the founder of Sheridan, John Laux, and we just learned about Edward Whitney purchasing it for the Bank of Sheridan. It is estimated that the cabin was moved 8 times over the years, only recently returning here to a plot of ground near its original site. Over the years, the cabin was taken apart, added on to, rebuilt, repaired, and extended, depending on the need. It managed to meet the social, financial, governmental, educational, and political needs of its time. That included hosting a general election within its wooden walls in 1882. Today it is under preservation by the National Society of Colonial Dames of America in Wyoming. Now we head to a footbridge that crosses Big Goose Creek into Kendrick Park, also once known as Pioneer Park. This bridge is dedicated to Henry Burgess, who was a member of the Whitney Benefits Board of Directors. We just learned about Mr. Whitney's foundation and the Whitney Commons Park namesake. The bridge is dedicated to Mr. Burgess's legal counsel for a historic 1995 lawsuit against the United States government to block a mining permit on Mr. Whitney's private land for 17 years. Litigation went all the way to the U.S. Court of Appeals and was settled in the Whitney Trust's favor for the amount of coal that was supposed to be mined, as well as 17 years worth of interest, estimated at over $200 million. That court award was the first of its kind and aids in the Whitney Benefits contributions to the Sheridan community to this day. The Big Goose Creek waterway would have been a natural resource to the regional Plains Indian nations who hunted in the larger area known as the Powder River Basin. The Powder River Basin extends from Sheridan County through the northeastern corner of Wyoming and southeastern Montana to the western side of South Dakota, including the Black Hills. Teeming with bison, antelope, bighorn sheep, and plains grizzlies, the basin was a vast bastion of Native American habitation and commerce. During the 1850s and 1860s, Sheridan County was part of the last remnant of the Great Plains culture where the native tribes roamed and hunted. Several tribes moved toward this area between 1450 and 1870, some following the seasonal migration of the plains bison, and others pushed west from the American westward expansion. Some of the native tribes who hunted in this region were the Crow, Arapaho, Kiowa, Northern Cheyenne, Shoshone, and the 7 bands of the Lakota. The Big Goose Creek Buffalo Jump is an archaeological site that is on the Wyoming listing of the National Register of Historic Places. In 1966, Dr. George Frizen, then Wyoming state archaeologist, began archaeological tests and excavations of the site. These investigations continued through 1970 and revealed that the site was in use in the late 15th or early 16th centuries, placing it in the late prehistoric period. The site consists of a drive lane where the bison were led to the jump-off point and the stream bed below the kill site. The water source to process the meat after the hunt would have been Big Goose Creek. Today, you can cross the bridge into Kendrick Park and walk to the opposite side of the park, where a wildlife reserve is home to a small herd of bison and elk. Spring is a great time to view the newborn bison and elk. Remember, these animals are for viewing only. Please do not feed them. This concludes our virtual tour of Big Goose Creek. We hope you enjoyed your journey while discovering some of the history of Sheridan and the Big Goose Valley. Special thanks to Lindy Burgess, Mark Demple, the library at Little Bighorn College, Whitney Benefits, the Wyoming Room of Sheridan County Fulmer Library, Wyoming newspapers from the Wyoming State Library, and narration is by Bill Yellowtail.
That was really great. That was really cool. All right. So we have a question from Dell. there was a Coca-Cola bottling company on the brewing site. Was that before it was torn down?
Yeah, I've heard about the Coca-Cola bottling site, and I'm not sure if it was in the brewery building or not. I would still have to do some more research on that. But I've heard about it. Yeah.
So my question is, what's your favorite fact you learned or your favorite moment of history that you learned about this area?
Oh, how the creek was moved or changed in direction. That just fascinates me, of how long that U shape was within almost the middle of Sheridan, and how long people probably had to deal with flooding in the different time periods of when there was probably more snow melt than others. It's very interesting to me. Yeah. Yes. Does anybody have any memories of the area or sites? I'm really curious. We're always looking for kind of adding on to our program with community members' history. We're always interested in that.
We love personal memories and photos of the area. It always is a good help.
And thank you, Jim and Rob, for attending and your comments. Yes. How about you, Alexis? You're very new to the area as well. What were some interesting moments of learning about Goose Creek Valley?
I guess I kind of like the idea that the creeks were moved at very different times, and how the little goose was moved first and then they moved the big goose.
Right.
Because you would think maybe it would be opposite, because the big goose seemed to cause more problems, but maybe that didn't arrive until the 1900s, or at least I think they said 1927 was the
More,
biggest flood.
yeah, the more of expansion of the town. The railroad was so important to come here to build up the town. So, yeah, yes.
I also really like archaeology, so the buffalo jump, I think is really cool. It'd be
Yes, I always think about that when I walk through Kendrick Park.
exactly. I'm like, where exactly?
Yeah. Was the buffalo jump site right in the town of Sheridan? Yes, Kendrick, if you're not familiar with Sheridan, Kendrick Park is a couple sites, I always think of things in city blocks, maybe 4 or 5 city blocks from Main Street, and it's within that park. There's a couple levels of the park. Oh, Jean Harm remembers where the Coca-Cola bottling plant was, across the street from Paul Street from the brewery, which was closed. I and friends went there often in the late 1950s and 60s. Okay, thank you. I can have a better location to kind of do some research on. Thank you, Jean. Yes.
And this tour is available in person as well, correct?
Yes, walking tour, and we would walk, like it's a circular walk that goes from the first cabin marker all the way around through Whitney Commons, Mill Park, and then ends at that bridge at Kendrick Park. And it's about an hour-long tour. So if you want to experience it at the actual sites, that's also a possibility. And the weather's shifting, so there's more opportunities to do that.
Those aerial shots were beautiful.
Yes, they help make that presentation. Yeah. Delta, is the trail marked? Well, It's the walking tour is, it doesn't have signs along the way. But these sites are actually, they were recently included last year in the downtown historical Sheridan walking tour, which goes down Main Street and then visits the cabin and the cabin marker. And that's through Travel Story. So it is called, I'm going to type it into the chat, Travel Story GPS app. So you can download it on your phone or your iPad, and you can also search the Travel Story website, and you can also look at it on your laptop without following the GPS guide. There is another way of viewing that portion. But the majority of these sites are on that Travel Story, the downtown historical, it's called Downtown Historical Sheridan Walking Tour. Oh, well, it's called Crooks Fountain now. The question is from Kathy Mueller. I don't know if I'm saying her last name right. Is there a plan to acknowledge Mrs. Crooks at the fountain? It's called Crooks Fountain now for General Crook. It was Mrs. Margaret Weltner's. It was named after her. And I have recently found out this information, so I would like to do some kind of signage to acknowledge her. I'm still doing research to find more about Mrs. Weltner, how she acquired the Mill Park land and things like that. So I'm still doing some research on her.
Do we have an idea of how the fountain was dedicated to her, but now is called Crooks Fountain? Do we know why that is?
What I've picked up is that there used to be a interpretive sign right next to the fountain that used to talk about General Crook's campaign for the Sioux War, and the two were constantly associated together in the community. That's how the name just got shifted, probably through calling it through like a landmark, Crooks Fountain. So I don't know if there was an original sign for Mrs. Weltner. I'm not sure of that.
So we have another question.
Sure.
Do you know when the mill buildings were torn down? I remember big red buildings in the 1940s, and there were weekend auction sales. My father bought a used bike for me there in 1947 or 48.
Oh, I don't have an exact date of when the buildings were torn down. It was 1939 when they put the first Lewis Street Bridge area in that talks about the change in Marion Street. And they might have been torn down when they did the actual Big Goose Creek reroute in the 1960s, early 1960s.
And then our next question is, what about the indoor swimming pool that was in the same general area? It was later filled in and used as a bus barn before finally being removed.
Oh, I am not aware of an indoor swimming pool. Only currently now at the YMCA. That's also a very interesting tidbit about the area. I will have to do some more research in that. And I appreciate you asking these questions and kind of giving more insight to the area, because the nice thing about our digital presentations is that we can always add on to them as I find out more things in the area. There's always room for growth. Okay, so indoor swimming pool. I will look into that too.
We got to start taking notes, Carrie, writing down stuff.
Yeah, okay.
I am going to link a survey in our chat box. So if anybody here wants to take that survey, that would be great. It helps us know what you guys want to know and how we did today. But we will also send it out in an email later.
Okay, and while you're doing that, Alexis, Judy responded The indoor swimming pool was called the Plunge. Later, it housed the trolley cars. Now, I have heard about the building that was for the trolley cars that was in that area. Okay, thank you, Judy. The Plunge.
Carrie, do you know when they stopped using trolley cars in Sheridan?
Not off the top of my
Okay,
head. I
that's
know
fine.
the trolley also went through the mining towns. That's the most that I know, because we also have the Black Diamond Trail that talks about that too.
The Plunge is a great name for
I know
a
it is.
indoor swimming pool.
I feel like the Y should have picked up on that and
Yeah,
kind of ran with that name. Yeah.
reintroducing the Plunge at the YMCA.
Okay. Mm. From Jean. Okay. Another comment from Jean Harm. In the 1960s, the Plunge building was the city equipment garage. Oh, so multiple uses and changes. Okay.
Do you want me to read this one?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so this is from Thomas Poole. My family came to Sheridan and homesteaded first on the Little Goose in 1897, and then on Big Goose Creek about 7 miles west of Sheridan. I might say this last name wrong, and I'm sorry. Klaus Peter Eldosen and his wife Jemima O'Neill Edison, I'm so sorry if I said those wrong, settled at the intersection of Big Goose Road and Beaver Creek Road in 1902. They gave land for the first school. We would love to see Big Goose history from Sheridan west of the mountains,
Oh,
to West Mountains.
okay. We can definitely expand upon all that. Thank you, Thomas. Yes. Okay.
And Carrie's information is at the top of our chat box if you guys want to get in touch with her either through email or calling into the office.
Yes. Sorry, I was reading the last chat again with the dates.
No, you're good.
It's very interesting.
We'll give it a few more minutes if anybody else has any more questions or interesting family stories to tell us pertaining to history.
Thank you, Dow. Yes. Well, thank you for everybody for joining this evening and for all your comments and also insight to other areas within the Big Goose Creek Valley. I really appreciate it. And again, feel free to reach out to me beyond this program. And thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good night. Enjoy the weather.